16 months ago, he held all the cards, but now it seems independent MP Andrew Wilkie's poker machine reforms are on a knife's edge. Today, the Prime Minister Julia Gillard gave the strongest signal yet that the numbers to get mandatory pre-commitment through Parliament just aren't there. Andrew Wilkie disagrees. It was a blow to anti-gambling groups just as they unveiled a new campaign aimed at counteracting the successful lobbying of Clubs Australia. Gavin Fang reports.
The anti-pokey lobby bet big on Parliament delivering gambling reform. Now the smart money is off Andrew Wilkie's mandatory pre-commitment proposal becoming law, but they aren't conceding defeat.
The debate's live at the moment. Politicians are actively debating at the moment. They're actively trying to, mutually agree a way forward. We never give up. We are the people that fought on slavery. We're the people that pushed for tobacco reform in this country, and we will get gambling reform.
I think his policy is running into some headwinds, and I think we anticipated that because we were confident that once people looked at the proposal, giving every poker machine player a card, giving problem gamblers a card, they would realise that there's not much to it.
Even as supporters of gambling reform prepared to make their point, Prime Minister Julia Gillard indicated on Sky Television that the numbers weren't there to get mandatory pre-commitment through Parliament.
I formed the view that there is an appetite for reform, but we do have to work on getting people on the same page. And so to get change, to make change real, we need a piece of legislation to go through the House of Representatives and then into the Senate. And I'm discussing poker machine reform with Mr Wilkie against that backdrop of this Parliament.
But in Sydney, a new coalition of anti-gambling groups called the Stop the Loss Coalition unveiled a fresh campaign to win voter support. They'll mail out 1 million letters to people in marginal electorates, pushing the anti-gambling agenda.
This coalition represents changing the wind. To say to politicians, when you lick your finger and it's just the $40 million campaign blowing from clubs, actually, now is the time to hear the wind blowing back.
The group is backed by the Get Up organisation and has brought in marketing minds like Neil Lawrence, the architect of the Kevin 07 and the anti-mining tax campaigns.
It's not too late. It's a critical point of the debate. And this issue won't go away and people won't stop campaigning on it until there is real justice. Until quite recently there was a full expectation of the groups that are involved in concern that there was an agreement in place, that it was an agreement in writing, that it was significant. So there probably wasn't perceived to be the need to be out there. A deal was seen to be a deal.
The Stop the Loss Coalition commissioned the Australia Institute to examine Clubs Australia's claims that introducing mandatory pre-commitment technology would cost between $3 to $5 billion.
So we decided we'd commission some research and actually look at the real figures. If you use standard accounting practice, that figure goes way south, down to $170 million to $340 million. That's the range of the costs of the kind of policy proposals that are being discussed at the moment.
It's fanciful. I think they've been watching too much of the Jetsons. It's not like that at all. There is no switch that can be flicked and machines miraculously being reprogrammed. That's not the way they work. It needs to be done individually. Our cost estimates have been provided to us by the people who actually make poker machines.
Clubs Australia released its own research today. It commissioned a Texter Crosby survey of 800 people. 55% said yes when asked if they supported alternative gambling reform to mandatory pre-commitment that would have less effect on clubs. Anti-gambling campaigners have dismissed those findings, but political analyst John WARHURST says it will ring true with some nervous Labor backbenchers.
I think the ultimate concern was what if the pre-commitment legislation had gone through, what might have been the negative impact on the government at the next election if it proved to be unpopular, or if, at the very least, the clubs and pubs continued to mount a multi-million dollar campaign against it. So I think there were wider concerns than the practical one of getting the legislation through the Parliament.
Andrew, nice to meet you. Thanks.
It all started so well between the Prime Minister and Andrew Wilkie 16 months ago.
We will work with states and territories to deliver this reform. But I've also agreed with him that the Commonwealth will act if the agreement of states and territories is not forthcoming.
I have judged that it is in fact the ALP that best meets my criteria, that the next government must be stable, must be competent and must be ethical.
But the numbers changed with last November's defection to the Speaker's chair by Liberal Peter Slipper, and so has the language.
The Parliament the Australian people voted for is capable of some remarkable things, but in order to get big legislation through, we need to get everybody on the same page. They're not on the same page now.
I disagree with her. I have spoken with a number of my colleagues, including as recently as this morning, and my assessment is that the numbers are there.
What is certain is that the Prime Minister will now face criticism that she's broken another promise.
Now it seems the government is preparing to dud Andrew Wilkie and dud everyone who took them seriously on this subject in the same way that they've dudded the Australian people over the carbon tax.
The real issue now is, does the government have a genuine appetite for poker machine reform? The focus should be fairly and squarely on the Prime Minister. This has become a test of her leadership. She's walking both sides of the fence on this issue.
All the while trying to hang on to Andrew Wilkie's support.
The government would be most unwise if it burned off Andrew Wilkie for all time or for a number of other issues during the year. And I think that would play badly with the electorate as well. I think the government certainly wants to avoid any suggestion that it casts allies aside at the first hint of bad weather.
Mr Wilkie says the only alternative to mandatory pre-commitment is $1 maximum bets. That's not a proposal an emboldened gambling lobby has any time for either.
We're not after the status quo. We actually want to see meaningful reform. We want to see measures that actually help problem gamblers. We're often painted in a contrary way, but it's not true. And we were on the road to doing that until Andrew Wilkie got in the way, quite frankly.